Today I have the privilege of being able to talk to someone who just seems to come up on my Facebook feed an awful lot, and who I see talking on Muff Wiggler's site an awful lot. His name's Logan Erickson, and he's the mastermind behind Low Gain Electronics, a company that I find pretty fascinating because he builds a lot of different kinds of things, and they all seem to be of interest to me in one way or another. So rather than defining him for you, I will let him do it himself. So let's start off by saying hi to Logan. Hi, Logan. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us. To kick this off, why don't I have you explain your work a little bit?
My work, I guess it could be considered a whole lot of chaos at this point, since I seem to not have a focus. But primarily synth builder. I dabble in arcade and pinball machines on the side as well. Musician. But as far as my day-to-day, I'm primarily a synth manufacturer, like modular synth manufacturer. I do a lot of custom builds, commission work for people as well. And I do a little bit of repair work on the side just to kind of keep me busy, as if I wasn't busy enough already. But, keeps the bills paid.
Sure. I like your explanation of being, maybe a little chaotic, because when I look at your product line, what it seems like is I'm almost watching the things that you personally are interested in. I would say of all the manufacturers, you have like the most personal set of tools that you sell. So you've got interfaces for 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch to banana. You've got a couple of Eurorack modules, the Submix series, which is probably the most widely known. You have panels for doing 5U conversions of some of Synthex modules. You've got a pretty wide variety, as well as doing builds of the TTSH and stuff like that. So it's a really diversified kind of set of work, but it seems like it's almost like looking at all the things that you're into, right? It looks like looking into your toy chest.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to focus in the last year a little bit more on the DIY, kind of the tools that might help people get into more of conversion practices for whether it's like porting over modules from, say, Eurorack into the Moog format. I'm kind of a fan of the Moog format, and it's definitely a comfortable format for me. I just wish there were far more modules available in that format. So you could definitely see that there's sort of a need for that.
Right. It's interesting. I actually, in my renewed interest in modulars, I've been using modulars for 20 years now, but when I kind of came back to them maybe 8 years ago, something like that, I started off with a .com focus system, although I had gotten other modules from other builders. And I really found the format interesting and useful. It was nice because to me it was very performative. It was easy to get your hands into it. It was really satisfying to jack in those big old 1/4 inch jacks, right? There was something to it that was really, it seemed more visceral,
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's just the spacing of everything and just the overall comfort, and it really comes down for me as interface. I'm very picky when it comes to an interface for a synthesizer.
What kind of things do you find cause you the most, like, the biggest psychic speed bumps when you're working with interface? What are the things that bother you?
I could definitely say cramming too much into a panel tends to drive me a little nuts. It's funny being a Eurorack manufacturer. It's like I deal with that on an everyday basis when I sit down and use my system. I don't want to like naysay the format. It's just I definitely think that it's one of those, just because you can fit it doesn't mean you should. It's definitely a words of wisdom. I think I say to myself at least.
Right. I agree. I mean, Eurorack's a wonderful format, but I think it's interesting to kind of. I don't know that many people who dabble in both, and so it's fun for me to talk to somebody that has, because sure, the jacks are a little different and stuff, but mentally there's nothing different between the two systems really. Right. But for some reason the the size of it, or maybe I don't know, maybe the way that the knobs felt in my hand or something. There was definitely a different way that I approached and interacted with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how everybody in general approaches a different interface differently. The way I approach the Moog format system is very different from, say, like how I approach a Surge system or a Eurorack system. It's very interesting to me to see how I interact with each format.
Right. Now, when I look at your site, what I see is kind of nods to all the formats, because in addition to having these conversion kits for 5U and Moog-sized units, you also have some things that touch on Buchla systems, some things that kind of hint towards Surge-based systems, and you mentioned it right there as well.
Yeah.
Do you dabble in those as well?
Yes. I'm a big fan of the Surge system. I kind of didn't come around to it up until about probably 4 or 5 years ago, when a friend introduced me to his system, and it just really forced me to think of synthesis in a different way. And I can't escape banana synths. I just love the banana connector. I don't know what it is. You got your built-in stack cable, and it's just all in all a really comfortable interface for me. And I got hooked on another format that would be the brand is Bug Brand.
Right.
I've been people have seen me perform with that system numerous times while I had it, and that was more of a like a 3U frac, but with bananas.
Right.
And that was kind of another sort of my segue into banana synth stuff. And I've been hooked ever since, and I love the Surge format. It's very comfortable. It's kind of like the ideal, for me, it's the ideal modular panel size.
The 4U, you mean? The height of it?
Yeah.
Or do you mean like the individual widths of the pieces?
Just everything about it just is comfortable for me. I'm not one for like a grid-based system usually, but like there's something about the Surge system that's like, okay, this is great. This is comfortable. Right. Vertical height-wise, you get just enough controls into the height. I just think like with Eurorack specifically, it's the vertical height that you have to work with just doesn't allow you to get you have to get kind of creative with regards to how you lay things out.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly, I can see that. One of the things I like doing in my podcast is talking to people about their background and how they get into things, and especially people who are adept at electronics and electronic design, how it is that they decided to focus on music electronics. I'm always curious about that. I'm curious to find out what your background is, how much of a musician you were versus how much of a tech kid you were, and what the path is to getting where you are today. Can you kind of fill that in for me a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I can pretty much, and it's funny. Okay, like I can blame my mother for everything, and she told me I would someday. She forced me to take classical piano lessons when I was very young for about 7 years, and at the time I hated her for it. But when I stopped, it kind of left me with having that the knowledge base of being able to pick up most instruments and play them musically, like by ear.
Right.
I guess I would say somewhere between the ages of like 12, 13, and 14, I think I was kind of introduced into like the world of industrial music. And, like back then, of course, I'm 32 now. So like Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, right. White Zombie, stuff like that. The Cure. I mean, all kinds of stuff from the 90s was pretty popular. And naturally I got into that. And I was kind of curious, what was making some of the sounds that I was hearing. And a friend got me into, a couple of different friends. One got me into circuit bending, and then one got me into just the noise scene in general and how that stuff was done and how you could use so little to create so much. And that was kind of how I got hooked, was, right out of middle school, early into high school.
What was the process you went to learn about electronics? Did you start off by sort of like naively doing circuit bending and then fill in the blanks?
Oh yeah.
Or did you take a more studied approach?
I definitely, I mean, I can blame circuit bending for sparking my curiosity into electronics. I don't know if that's cliche or not, but it was around the time when it was first starting to get pretty popular, and I kind of turned it into a pseudo business through high school, selling circuit bent speak and spells and SK1s on eBay. For anybody that got one that may be listening, I apologize. My skills were not as good. But yeah, so that's kind of where I got interested into the electronics. And my senior year of high school, I was offered to go into college early, and I started a basic electronics degree. And that was because I really wanted to learn more about, synthesizer electronics. At that point, I was kind of full into electronic music and DJing, a lot of house music, drum and bass music, and stuff like that. And so I was very interested in how this technology was being created. Unfortunately, in college, it was not necessarily technical, but my teachers were looking at me like, we don't teach synthesizer electronics. Like, we're going to teach you how to fix something for some industrial complex, like, right. Or like a warehouse, some sort of a manufacturing place. And it's like, well, that's not doing it for me.
Right. My first year of college was an electrical engineering degree, and I was sorely disappointed by what passed for electrical engineering in that kind of scenario. There wasn't no fun involved.
Yeah. And growing up in Duluth, Minnesota, that's just what they kind of train you for is planning on taking that local, simple job.
Right.
It was a basic electronics degree, so it wasn't like a double E. It was just a community college.
I see. Okay.
I ended up actually dropping out about one semester shy of that degree. Looking back at it now, I kind of regret that just because it would have been good to finish. But I got into audio engineering after that, so I just started working at recording studios.
So coming out of Duluth, where did you find recording studios to work at?
Well, I had moved. This would have been 2003. I moved from Duluth to Minneapolis, and here in Minneapolis there are a number of recording studios, but one of the ones that I worked out of helped a buddy of mine, Tom Herbers from Third Ear Recording Studio, which sadly is now closed due to the U of M expansion projects and stuff. But so it was a lot of fun. I mean, I went to school for engineering, audio engineering for a short period of time, and then started working, recording people and stuff. And I quickly realized that I don't really like listening and recording to other people's terrible music all the time. Right. Because you get lucky and get some really good bands and whatnot, but it just kind of started to become more headache than it was worth, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, well, the recording studio business is always a tough sled, because unless you happen to be running Abbey Road Studio, you sometimes are going to have to do the children's sing-along record. You're sometimes going to have to edit the audio tapes from a melanoma conference. Both of those are part of my history, so I know what you mean.
Nice.
Some of that stuff can be a little rough.
Yeah, it gets a little tiring where it's like, oh, we could fix that later. And it's like, well, why don't you just play it right the first time? And,
right.
It's less work to do later.
Yeah, right, exactly. When is it that you switched over to doing the music electronics then as kind of your main gig?
I was kind of doing it part-time for a while I had my day job. 2004, I was working with one of my mentors, Eddie Chiletti, at Manhattan Sound Technicians, which he was actually based in South St. Paul, but originally hailing from Manhattan, fixing lots of DAT machines and, studio gear. And that was kind of where I got my crunch course in, hardcore electronics repair. And it was a really good learning experience for me, and it definitely got me hooked on doing what it is that I wanted to do. And I was starting very little at that point to start working on actual kind of audio circuits for myself that were, less modifying of synthesizers and circuit bending and stuff like that. And I wanted to kind of start focusing on more, I won't say original pieces, but, something from scratch as opposed to modifying something that was already in existence. So that was kind of where I started in that. But yeah, I guess I've been working on audio electronics. I mean, since I was 14 in reality. But
Right.
I guess when it came to doing this full time for myself, it was 2 years ago. Yeah, basically about 2 years ago now, I quit my job. I was working at Great River Electronics.
Okay.
And it seemed kind of the right time for me to leave and the right time for me to kind of start focusing on doing this full time. And, I've been super happy. It's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Well, that's cool. Well, I know that 2 years ago, that would have been, you were full on doing Eurorack stuff at that point. You had the short bus and the mix, is it Mix 7 or Submix 7?
Submix 7 and the short bus. Those actually came out in 2011.
Oh, okay.
2010, 2011. I was still working. I had a day job at the time. But yeah, those were the first two Eurorack products that came out. And they certainly they did well for what they were. And considering how I won't say young the Eurorack scene was at the time, but it was just at that point where it was starting to, people were catching on. It wasn't just, Dopefer that was around. It was,
right.
Whether it was Make Noise or Harvest Man or it wasn't as huge as it is like now. It's really gotten amazingly large at this point. The market has.
Right. But as a builder, then you were kind of in play during the blooming of the rose that is Eurorack. What, in your mind, or at least from your personal sense of it, what were some of the big turning points? What were some of the big turning points in terms of modules that kind of upped the game in the community? What were some of the things that you saw happening, like with specific users that all of a sudden were getting into it? What were some of the turning points for you with that, John, with that environment?
I guess it would go without saying. I mean, once Mutable came into the market, that was Mutable Instruments. That was a huge game changer as far as I was concerned. Just seeing what he's doing with his products, it's amazing to me. I mean, really, like, I don't possess any skills of programming, and to see the hybrid concept come in. I mean, obviously, Harvest Man was doing a lot of like the Hertz Donut and Piston Honda, which again were fantastic modules. Like I love his stuff. But seeing some of the things that were coming out from Mutable, like braids,
Right.
It's been definitely interesting to see the market, like how it's evolved and how it's, what was considered to be like, I won't say like cool, but what was considered to be like the norm in 2011, 2012, how much has drastically changed now that, like, you see so many companies. I mean, to see like Waldorf, Roland, and, these larger synth companies starting hopping on the bandwagon for Eurorack, it's amazing to me.
Yeah, indeed it is. Now, one of the things that concerns me and concerns a lot of people, I think, is the sense that it's a relatively small community, but the number of product makers is growing maybe more rapidly than the number of users. Do you have any fears of that?
I have a fear of that pretty much every day. being that this is my primary income,
Right.
It puts a lot of pressure on what I've seen in the last 2 years is this growing trend in constantly announcing new modules. And then part of that is the market, I think. Part of that would be like the resellers. It's kind of like what's going to be the trendy module this week. And that actually has me very nervous because, if we want to draw parallels to, say, like the boutique pedal market, I mean, it's the same exact situation that's happening.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have that to draw on for inspiration. So, that could happen even faster. And that's one of the things that I am concerned about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but there definitely is a map there has been a map drawn by the pedal manufacturers, and almost like the race to everybody starving is a little bit of a scary thing to see.
Hmm. Yeah, and I encourage people to get into it, and I probably one of the main reasons why I haven't released as much as I would like to at the moment is I really want to try to put something out there that's somewhat different, and you're seeing a lot of repeating themes, or whether it's like, I mean, there's only so much you can do in the analog world, and it has me a little afraid, just because it's like, I'm a very analog guy, and I don't, like I said, I don't know, I'm not a programmer, so it's kind of like,
Right.
well, I either hire somebody or I need to learn how to do this stuff. But
Right.
it's the struggle to kind of put something out that's going to be worthwhile, but I want it to stand the test of time, but I don't want it to just like be rehashing something that's been, beat to death for so many times.
Yeah, I hear you. And it seems like this concept of having to constantly announce new, it not only has to be new, but everything has to be groundbreaking, and everything has to do massive amounts of stuff. And it seems like, I don't know, it seems it's almost overwhelming to keep up, let alone to try and make sense of what could end up being a musical tool. But
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of getting facility on the instrument that you have. But if your instrument is changing every week, it's really difficult for me to imagine how you become a strong player on that instrument, right?
Yeah, and that's the key word there is instrument, I think. And being a manufacturer, I'm going to always say, buy, buy, buy. But what I shouldn't be saying is that it's like what we're seeing is it's called Eurorack for a reason. I mean, people love the consumption aspect of it, and
Right.
it's interesting because what we're supposed to be doing is building a completely custom instrument and focus on that instrument and learn that instrument, learn its ins and outs, find its weaknesses and exploit them, and set limitations for yourself. And what I'm seeing more and more is it's less about the instrument, more about, well, look what I've got.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes great sounds. And I'm not going to get into the argument of like, everybody should be making, quote unquote, legitimate music with their modular, because that's not the argument. I don't think that's one to have.
Right. No, but one of the things I have noticed, and a couple of weeks ago I did an interview with a guy, and we were talking, he, for his own like consumption of modular systems, he made some very specific decisions. One of them was that he wasn't going to use modules that he didn't hand build. So he consumed kits, which when you have a kit, you're just consuming things at a slower pace anyway, right? Because you have to build them.
Yep.
And, but also he wanted things in surge type format as well. So he used that as kind of a thing to limit his access to tons of different, magic modules, and instead put himself in a position of having to really understand how his oscillators work so that he could, get in depth on how the FM is peculiar in different cases and stuff like that. And I thought it was a really interesting approach. There's always this trope in music that limitations breed creativity, right?
Exactly.
But I was really interested to see how he applied that concept to the actual construction of his instrument. It was really interesting.
Oh, it's one of the things that I love about, say, like the surge system specifically, is typically, or at least traditionally, it was one large panel.
Right.
You're committed to what is in that. Like, so you have to think it out and plan it out very well.
Right.
And that's nice, because it means like if you're going to swap that out, which I don't recommend, but it means you're going to lose a huge chunk of your system if you choose to do that.
Right. It's going to be a traumatic experience.
Yeah. So, and that's, I mean, again, it comes back to the instrument, and I think it is very important for people to start. I mean, I've gone from really large Eurorack systems to, for instance, my dedicated Harvestman Polyvox system. Like it's just a single 104 HP, so you get 3U 104 HP with, you know, very similar to the ARP 2600 setup, in the sense that I had 3 oscillators. I doubled up on the ADSR VCAs and I doubled up on the filters. Yeah, and added what was it? It was kind of like a slew generator to it, but that was the system, and I had so much fun just using that system because it was like, this is it. This is all I have. Now let's get creative.
Right. Now, did you find, like in that case, that it helped that it was mostly from one specific manufacturer, that it integrated itself better in some way?
I would agree with that. I get a little OCD sometimes when it comes to the panels and stuff. I mean, I could have a full system that's a million different manufacturers, but and it wouldn't bother me, but it definitely helps to have, to me, grouping of manufacturers, or at least similar aesthetics. I had a complete Verbo system, also very comfortable to use, well thought out. Mark and I have very similar opinions with regards to performance aspect for a modular synthesizer, and so I loved the interface of his system as well, and they definitely group nicely.
I'm glad you said that, because I look at my system and it's just clear that there comes a point at which I'll actually like make compromises in order to make it so that the panels kind of look right next to each other. I can't do the checkerboard style system. That's an OCD thing for me. That's a psychic speed bump that I can't get over.
Yeah, I've got at least one friend. I won't call him out by name, but he's got the OCD on panel altering down as with regards to, he had to swap out all of the knobs so that they all matched. All of his cables were like certain colors, and his music is absolutely wonderful. So I'm not trash talking him by any means, but he'll know who he is when he hears this.
That's hilarious.
But you know, I get it. I mean, and that's what's the beauty of the modular design is, like, I mean, by design, we have the choice of putting in whatever we want, and we can alter it too if we want to change. You know, we like what's there, but you know, you're seeing more and more like people starting to offer alternate panels, which at first I would think like I'd be insulted if somebody wanted to change out my panel. And believe me, I got plenty of questions with the original short bus being the school bus yellow. Right. You know, I'd constantly get emails like, "Oh, do you have an aluminum panel?" Yeah. It's like, no, it's school bus yellow because it's a short bus, man. Right. I thought that was clever. But I appreciate those, the people that want to alter their synth and make it, more pleasurable, I guess, to them.
So, one question I have, earlier you said that one of the things that you're doing is doing some custom work, custom design or custom creation. What does that look like? Are you actually doing one-off modules for people? Or are you modifying modules to spec? Or what does that kind of look like? Because I think there's a lot of people for whom the exactly perfect module doesn't exist. And so then the question is, well, I would love to do something, but I can't design it myself. Is there someone that can do it for me? And will they only do it if my name is Keith Emerson? Questions like that.
Yeah. A lot of the commission work tends to be like, if somebody doesn't have DIY skills, they'll want me to build, whether it's, I've got a couple that I'm working on, like the hex inverter 808 toms. I've got a few of those in process for people that just don't want to, they don't have the skill set to assemble something like that. Or, I've had some requests for like completely custom modules, and some of the stuff can be done. But as you said, I mean, when I had a day job, I would be more open to sitting down and working with somebody to do something completely custom that's more of an in-depth concept.
Right.
But nowadays I have to kind of weigh my options with regards to how much time is that going to really take away from what I need for out of my week.
Sure.
And so it's kind of, I mean, I've flat out told, pretty large customers of mine where it's just like, I would love to do that for you, but I mean, if I quoted you proper for just the development cost on that, you'd laugh at me.
Right.
So,
Right.
and it's not me trying to like rip anybody off. It's just I have to be kind of realistic about certain things at this point. And so, yeah, so it's a lot of what I do is kit building essentially for people.
Sure.
There'll be like custom synth panels that people want me to put together with regards to like the Surge stuff. I've got a friend who does some beautiful metalwork. Ebanasty metalworking. I'll just throw his name out there, Luigi. He does absolutely beautiful work for me, and that's really allowed me to do some pretty cool one-off pieces for people.
That's pretty neat. Yeah, he does the stuff where it's like really deconstructed metalwork, right?
Yeah, it's like acid etching, and one of his he can do clean. He can do really clean just fine, but he loves doing something that just looks like, I mean, it looks gritty, and I love that style about him. It's really cool.
Well, that's interesting, and thanks for bringing him up. I've always wanted to know somebody who knew him so I could find out a little bit more.
Yeah,
because I'm fascinated by the look of that stuff. I mean, it is so like post-industrial nastiness. It's really cool.
Yeah, Luigi is an awesome guy. I mean, he's an amazing friend, and oddly enough, I mean, because of the modular scene, I mean, he and I have become, I consider him one of my best friends, even though like we never talk on the phone. He lives in Cincinnati and I live in Minnesota, like in Minneapolis. And so, we'll be texting each other back and forth, usually on a daily basis. And it's because of this modular scene that we've become friends. And it's been great. It's truly awesome. I love the fact that, the amount of people that I've met through this community. It's just amazing to me.
Sure. Our time is already coming to an end. I can't really believe it, but that's fantastic. One of the things I would like you to tell us a little bit about is what's next on the map for Logan Electronics. What's a modular, some modules that you have coming up that are going to hit the scene?
I've got about 6 to 8 prototypes in process right now that unfortunately I haven't had the ability to focus on any one of them, but I am hoping to get a filter envelope combo module coming out here pretty soon. I've got a kind of a ring mod wave shaping circuit that I've been working on that should be pretty cool, and then an active switch module that will, I'm doing it for myself. I don't expect large sales from it, but it is something that will be a Eurorack product, and hopefully people will like it.
That's cool. That sounds great. I'll be curious about this ring mod and wave shaper thing. That's one area where I haven't been really satisfied with a lot of the things that I've tried. And I like ring mods anyway, and I love wave shaping, but I just never can seem to find anything that, it doesn't speak to me in the way that's where surge systems to me were quite amazing. Mm-hmm. The wave shaping, that wave multiplier, is just a stunning sounding piece of electronics.
Yeah, and I can't help. I mean, I'll always kind of pay homage to the Surge designs. I mean, I'm heavily influenced by them, so I'd be lying if I said some of the stuff I'll be doing won't be heavily influenced. So.
Right, sure, absolutely. And then finally, it sounds like, I mean, you mentioned that you're a musician, and it sounds like you're a fairly active performer. Now that I'm kind of in your neck of the woods, I'd like to hear a little bit about your performance practice. I mean, do you do many gigs? Do you get the chance to do some gigs?
Well, yeah. Well, first off, welcome to Minnesota.
Thank you.
Yeah, I play out not super often. I kind of swore off booking my own gigs in a sense because it's very stressful. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I play probably 4 to 6 times a year, and it's usually all improvised modular, whether it's techno or down tempo or ambient stuff. I used to do a lot more just pre-programmed music, and I got really burnt out on that. So now I'm pretty much exclusively an improvised musician when it comes to performing live, and it's been a lot of fun. It keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, indeed it does. That's fantastic. So we'll have to keep in touch when you're playing a gig sometime. I'm gonna just absolutely pop in, and maybe at some point we could get a chance to even do some jamming together. That seems like that'd be a lot of fun.
It would be a lot of fun.
Well, Logan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And to finish up, any words of encouragement to the modular or electronic heads out there?
Words of encouragement. Let's see. There's no light at the end of the tunnel with regards to purchasing modules, but if you can have the discipline to focus on a small system, you'll get a lot out of it.
Agreed. Very good. Well, thank you so much, and have a great evening, man.
Yes, you too. Thanks for having me on.
All right, bye. Quick note of thanks to Logan for doing a quick interview. I was under the gun a little bit this week, and he helped out. I am looking forward to seeing him do some gigs, though, as well as checking out some more of his gear that's coming out. Thanks again for listening. Check in with us next week. Got more good stuff in the hopper. So I'll be talking at you then. Catch you later. Bye.